Good afternoon. I'm Eduardo Ochoa, president of CSUMB, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the third session of the 2015-16 President Speaker Series. Today, we will be discussing workforce development. It is an issue that will have dramatic impact on the economic welfare of this region, as well as on the personal success and satisfaction of those who will help move that economy forward. I recently saw some numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics about how today's workforce compares to that 40 years ago. That's when many people now nearing retirement age were just starting their careers. In the 1970s, the U.S. was a manufacturing and retail-dominated economy. Today, those employment areas have shrunk, while the service sector has exploded, employing 4 times as many people now as it did 40 years ago. And while the Labor Bureau statistics don't break out the health sector, it is safe to assume growth in health employment is a major factor in that increase. Also, if I had been sitting in the audience at a session like this 4 decades ago, I doubt if the speaker would have said that an obscure file sharing service, mainly being used by the Department of Defense and academic researchers, was going to transform the way we work and live. In 1974, it was given the name of the Internet. Perhaps you've heard of it. Back then, owners of big retail stores had no inkling of Amazon, newspaper publishers had no forewarning of Craigslist, and on and on. Today, the largest companies by market capitalization are Apple, Alphabet, which is the new parent company of Google, and Microsoft, not General Motors or General Electric. While it's hard to predict the next big thing to have a transformational impact, it is safe to say that the continuing revolution in information technology, the continuing expansion of computing power through what is known as Moore's Law, is going to increasingly transform radically our world, especially through the application of artificial intelligence. We can't be sure exactly which jobs are going to be eliminated and which ones are going to be created as a result of that revolution. So we in higher education have a responsibility to educate our students to be flexible thinkers, clear communicators, and collaborative problem solvers, so they can be adaptable to whatever the workforce turns out to be. We don't know what the next 4 decades will bring, but we want our graduates to be ready, not just to react to those events, but to help shape them. Today, we will hear from a panel of 3 people who can share their distinct viewpoints on the workforce of today and of the future. And let me introduce the first speaker, Tim Rainey. Tim Rainey is Executive Director of the California Workplace Development Board, which works with Governor Brown on the development and oversight of the state's workforce investment system. Previously, Mr. Rainey served as Director of the Workforce and Economic Development Program of the California Labor Federation and as Policy Director of the California Workforce Association. Our next speaker will be Chris Benner. Chris Benner is a professor of environmental studies at UC Santa Cruz, has focused his research on regional labor markets and how they deal with technological change while providing economic opportunity. I should also mention that Dr. Benner's co-authored the book Equity, Growth, and Community, What the Nation Can Learn from America's Metro Areas, with Manuel Pastor, who spoke to our President's Speaker Series last year. And finally, our third speaker will be Rick Entel. Rick Entel is the CEO of Tanimura & Entel and has led the company since its formation in 1982. During that time, the agricultural industry has been subject to a long list of regulatory and technological changes and disruptions to its labor market. Through it all, Tanimura & Entel has maintained its leadership position through innovation while helping to build stronger communities. While our panelists are making their presentations, please write any questions you might have on the cards provided, and we will have staff members in the audience to pick them up for the Q&A session to follow. And now I will ask Tim to begin today's discussion. you, Tim.
Thank you, President Ochoa. Delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It just occurred to me as I sat down that I really should have been more careful about what socks I wore today. Mine are not just black. My wife picked these out. I worked for the senator in Sacramento. His name will not be mentioned, O'Connell, who was superintendent of schools also. I don't know why I'm telling this story, because I'm thinking socks. I was in a meeting with him. It was my first day as staff of the Senate Democratic Caucus, and it was a staff meeting, and Senator O'Connell came in, and he sat down, and when he sat down, the pant leg kind of pulled up, and I noticed on the back of his heel a gaping hole in his sock. And since then, I've been like, I got to be really careful about what socks I wear. He clearly was very busy with other things and didn't need to worry about what socks he was wearing. Please do not share that. Oh, it's videotaped. Perfect. So that's not what I came to talk about. I wanted to discuss a few things. I think it'll cue up my PowerPoint presentation in a second. Do I have to do something to make that show on the screen? I just need to say it, maybe. So I want to talk about a few things, and I'll do it quickly because there are much smarter people who are queued up to talk after me. One, in the context of building the 21st century workforce, want to, of course, talk about what the State Workforce and Development Board is doing on behalf of Governor Brown and behalf of the people of California. But the considerations that went into developing our state strategic plan on behalf of the governor are largely three things. One is relative job insecurity. Technology is your best friend. I spent all morning making this PowerPoint. It's got to work. Oh, you guys are fine. Everybody come up on stage because it's right here. Just don't look at my socks. I'm just the person they put up as they go through the technological glitches to entertain you while things get sorted out. It was perfect. So I'll talk about job insecurity, relative job insecurity, declining intergenerational income mobility, which is a mouthful, and retiring baby boomers. Actually, all themes that President Ochoa touched on in his comments at the start. I have these awesome slides that I'll show you. But what we're trying to do is better understand what's happening in labor markets around the state of California, because California, as you know, is not a monolith economically. It's a bunch of regional economies that often compete globally. So when you talk about labor markets in Monterey County, for instance, or in the Central Coast, you're going to see something and talk about something very different in Los Angeles, the greater LA region. So we talk about labor markets, plural. We want to understand those so we can make better policy decisions in Sacramento, develop better program, but also provide good guidance to practitioners out there all over the state. And that concludes my remarks. All right, I got a clicker. Boom. What I was going to actually say also is I'm going to talk very generally about labor markets and how that impacts the work we do. But the person that's really going to get into detail is Professor Chris Benner, who has written a bunch of fantastic books about this stuff. So when I'm done and he gets up here and talks, you're going to realize that this was a lot of baloney, because he's going to dig into the detail of how these things actually work. And then you're going to hear from the private sector, my friend Andy, who's going to talk about how it really happens with business on the ground and the challenges there. So first, job insecurity. I think you guys feel this. How many of you in the audience, there is an audience, how many of you are students? Right on. How many of you want to be students forever? Yeah, I'm not talking to the professors. We're on to you guys. There was a time, a long time ago, when you could train for a specific job with a specific skill and do well in the labor market. You could stay in an occupation or a career forever. In fact, when my dad graduated high school and went to work directly for, near Kansas City, Delco Battery, he could reasonably expect to stay there until he retired. Things, though, of course, as you know, and as we're going to talk more about, are very different today. You're going to change jobs many, many times throughout the course of your career, probably close to 12 job times throughout the course of your career. And I think this is actually a little bit old. This was done, a longitudinal study by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, just looking at sort of the back end of the baby boom generation. But for, I think I'm Gen X, I'm not even sure, and millennials, many of you, that's probably accelerated. So it's likely more than 12 times throughout the course of your career, several more. So for success today in the labor market, it's really important to impart this reality that you are going to have to develop not a specific skill for a specific job, but broad skill sets to allow you maximum mobility through the labor market as you sort of transition from job to job, occupation to occupation sometimes, and even career. So you should consider yourselves lifetime learners or students forever, what some people call working learners. So what we've got to do is develop an education, training, employment services system statewide, regionally based, which I'll talk about more, that allows people to check in and out of the labor market throughout the course of their lives to get skill upgrading, to get new training, to get new degrees or certificates that will allow them to be the most successful in today's labor market. The next one, still on job security. These are all very uplifting slides. I understand that. This is one of my favorites. This really freaks people out. In California, there are 1 million involuntary job separations every month. Yeah, every month, so not every year, and in California alone. So in a labor market of 19 million workers, 1 million involuntary job separations a month is striking volatility in churn. So when a laid-off worker gets back into the labor market to find a job, he or she is going to lose on average between 15 and 30% of income. And that's largely, this is based on an Urban Institute study a couple of years ago. That's largely because our benefits are employer-based. So you're disconnected from the employer, you get back in. The deal you're getting back in, both in terms of salary or wages, but also because you've lost your retirement benefits and your health insurance benefits, your income's going down by that much. So imagine this churn occurring every month in the state of California, and it's not hard to see why the middle class, not just here, but all over the country, because it's not just specific to California, why the middle class really feels squeezed. This is, I think, a very important thing to really dig into. More uplifting slides. Income mobility. I think I'm going to say something positive at the end. I haven't looked at the back end of the slides yet, but we'll see together. Intergenerational income mobility. This is the ability of somebody to move from the bottom 10% to the top 10% within his or her lifetime. So as you know, you've heard a lot, this is harder to do now than it was a long time ago when my parents were young. It's also harder to do in the US than any other advanced economy in the world, Western economy. So in the United States, the biggest determinant of your future income is not how hard you work, it's not whether you play by the rules, it's not even your education level necessarily. The biggest determinant of your future income is your parents' income, which flies in the face of what we understand to be the core American value, core to the American dream, which is the equality of opportunity to get ahead no matter what the circumstances, accidental circumstances of your birth are. So Janet Yellen, no raving left-winger, head of the Federal Reserve, recently warned that income and wealth inequality are near the highest levels in the past 100 years. She talked about the Great Gatsby curve, the finding that income inequality and intergenerational mobility are inextricably linked. Mobility is less in countries that have higher or the greatest inequality. Chris is going to talk, I think, haven't seen his, actually I did see his slides because we were sitting at the bar last night going over his slides, which is a little nerdy to be sitting at the bar looking at PowerPoint slides, talking about labor markets, and everybody sort of gawking at the slides, trying to make sense of his charts, which you'll see. It took a couple of beers for me to understand what he was talking about. So I think Chris is going to talk about economic growth is less in regions with greater inequality. So this is the same sort of phenomenon that's going on. The point is that inequality and income mobility are two sides of the same coin. Paul Krugman, only a little bit more rhetorical, says this. I don't need to do a dramatic reading. Training and education alone, we know, are not going to solve poverty. We've got issues of housing, transportation, issues you're looking at regionally, healthy communities, health insurance, and access to health insurance, so it's not just employer-based. And then workers' relative bargaining power. These are all critical factors. So education and training are not the only things that are going to move the needle on income mobility across the country or in Monterey County. You've got to look at all these pieces. But a decent income for parents is essential, and certainly education and training is going to have influence there. And I say parents because I deal with the adult side, a lot of us do, in terms of education and training. And again, it's back to the ability of people to check back into the education and training system as they need new skills, as employers require different kinds of skills. This is not something that's very easy for people to navigate currently. So baby boomers are retiring finally, hopefully, over the next 10 years or so. We talked about this at lunch. How many people in here were born between 1946 and 1964? Some of you are lying. I can see your faces. No, I was kidding. So keep your hands up for a second, actually. All right, if you're younger, look at a person with their hand up. You're going to take their job pretty soon. Not right now. Give them a little time. You can put your hands down now. Not soon enough. Good. So between 2012 and 2022, California is projected to have approximately 6.3 million job openings. As you've heard, California is outpacing the country in job growth. Yay, California, way ahead of Texas. Isn't that lovely? That's a little political dig there. However, most of the job openings are not due to growth. They're due to the baby boomers retiring. A full 2 out of every 3 jobs over the next 10 years will be open because of replacement, somebody retiring. Important to think about, especially from a workforce perspective and a practitioner's perspective, because it's a great opportunity to work with employers, and this is true across industry sectors, to work with employers to train people up to take those jobs that are being vacated by the baby boomers, and then we can move new people in with good quality training and certificates that have value in the labor market at the front end or at the entry level. So I don't think about the retirements necessarily as a crisis, but as an opportunity. And we hope you guys have a lot of good golf in your retirement, if you golf. So to the state plan, what the hell are we doing? Schumpeter, an early 20th century Austrian economist that some of you may have heard of because he coined this term creative destruction. Have you heard that term? It's been bandied about by mostly management type gurus. His definition of economic development is putting existing resources to work in new ways. And so when people ask me what the State Workforce Board is up to on behalf of the governor in developing the state strategic plan for the next 4 years, what I say is we're in the business of creative realignment. That's putting existing programs and resources to work in new ways to achieve scale and greater employment impact in a way that responds to what's happening to workers and businesses in today's labor market, not what was happening in the 1970s. So why alignment and scale? Why is that important? We talk about silos. That's programs that are built specifically for maybe a particular population. Silos are talked about in Sacramento as bad, but they're not bad because there are populations that need specific focus: low-income adults, migrant seasonal farm workers, people with disabilities, veterans, other groups, the reentry supervised population. We need to have programs that are really focused on moving the needle in terms of employment for specific populations. So silos aren't bad. What is the enemy of good work, I think, is fragmentation. So if you've got, for example, a local education, a workforce program, it can change a life. It can change many lives. But if you have multiple workforce education, training, employment services programs that are working together in common behind a common agenda for a common good, with common goals and metrics and all these things. If you do that and you organize it that way, it doesn't just change a life, it can change communities. So that's why we talk a lot about alignment and getting rid of the silos, or at least getting the different programs to talk together and work together better. So we aim to shift at the State Workforce Board a workforce system that is currently largely locally based programs and fragmented to locally based services that are guided by regionally defined vision and goals. And why is regional important? We talked about this at lunch and a little bit back in the green room as we were watching you come in. We watch you come in, by the way, so I know a lot about you that you don't know I know. I'll tell you later during the Q&A. Why regional? To achieve meaningful impacts, programs need to connect to the employers that are driving regional employment. So if you've got employment, workforce, education, training programs that have no relevance whatsoever to the companies in your region and what their needs are immediately, but also over the longer term, if you don't have that calibration of supply and demand, you're not going to do anybody any good. You're going to be training people, throwing them out in the labor market, hoping that they do well, have success. The chances are they won't unless you can align these things very closely. So that's why we talk about regional. It also is because industry sectors don't organize within political jurisdictions or program jurisdictions. They tend to organize regionally. So we can't think about how we work within our own program jurisdiction. I did this with a lot of fear that I wouldn't be able to explain it. I think it's self-explanatory. I'll try to describe it. So in any particular region, see, you look at the bottom there, the supply, and it's not on the bottom for any particular reason, just because I'm not very good at PowerPoint. If you look at the supply in a particular region, there are multiple programs, right? They're all doing their own thing generally. Again, they're fragmented. They have different performance requirements from either the federal government or the state government, different populations they have to serve, different ways of reporting data, different service delivery kind of cultures. They just basically tend not to work together. They also, many of these programs, are required by statute or by regulations or whatever, or because they think it needs to be done, to have an industry advisory group. So a lot of these programs will individually and separately have industry advisory groups where they're talking to employers, maybe in the right sectors, but they're all doing it separately and inviting them to separate tables, the same employers to separate tables, and driving the demand sector or the demand side absolutely crazy. A person over there on the left scratching his or her head, big question mark, who needs to navigate all of these programs to get the wherewithal, the aptitudes and skills to be successful at the top with jobs, with those sectors that are driving regional employment, is going to have a heck of a time navigating all of this. What often happens to people is they get access to one program because they walked into one door and ended up having to get services someplace else and then doing things all over again. So there's a lot of redundancy built into the way things are currently not organized. On the demand side, you have a similar problem. Employers don't, this is the big secret, they don't tend to work together across sectors, right? So they don't sit down and think about a common vision for organizing talent in a region to help deal with their skills gaps, impending or immediate and real. They don't even organize within a sector. So manufacturers in a particular region don't sit down, because they're busy competing, right? They generally don't sit down and think about how are we going to build a skilled workforce in common. What they do is they come at it sort of separately. Again, kind of like silos. So there's no organization on either the supply or demand side. So what we're trying to do from Sacramento, although you can't drive things from Sacramento, we know that, is to organize the supply side, right? To put some form around it. Again, if everybody's kind of marching to the same drum, it's the same vision for the economy over the next 5 to 10 years, same kind of common goals. We get the data stuff right so we can share data. You organize that piece, you're going to get the kind of scale that'll make big employment impacts. You got to do the same stuff on the demand side. We've got to organize the demand side. I actually learned at lunch that this is already happening here, and President Ochoa is actually leading the charge on exactly this stuff. So if you were at lunch, I'm really sorry for repeating this, and you're like, oh, go tell somebody else we're already doing it in this region. But for those of you who weren't at lunch, you missed really good rice. So we've got to organize the demand side and the supply side. What we're investing in Sacramento, all over the state, is developing that middle piece, the regional leadership. So this is where the industry folks in those sectors that are driving regional employment, those employers, are at that table. Labor organizations that represent the workers in those sectors, civic leaders, political leaders, community-based organizations, education leaders like President Ochoa, and government. At that table, helping to defining the vision for the region, where it needs to be economically and socially over the next decade or so. And then setting out that North Star. We hope it's improving intergenerational income mobility, but organizing the supply side and the demand side so that they work together in tandem. So you get something like this. The ability of people to come in and navigate the various programs because they're working together. You're not going to have to start over all the time. You reduce the duplication, you increase the scale, you increase the employment impacts. But those programs are all together connecting the job seekers, the workers, the students, to good jobs in those industry sectors that are driving regional employment. So what you achieve, if we do all this right, if we get the skills agenda right, is the companies get the skilled workforce they need, they're more competitive, they grow, they add jobs, more people have jobs, they get paid, they have more money in their pockets, they go in their communities and spend that money in the community, and that primes a pump, and you create this virtuous cycle. I know this is not easy to do. Anybody here watch South Park? Nobody watches South Park. This is being recorded, so I'll be careful. Really, not that many people watch South Park, huh? All right, well, there's this episode of South Park where the characters have a plan, they steal underwear, and they want to make money from stolen underwear. And that's the plan. They got step 1 and they got step 3, but they have no idea how to turn stolen underwear into making money. So that middle part is completely, it's very funny. You really have to, trust me, you got to go find this episode. So what we understand, we don't got step 3 dialed either. We know we got to steal underwear, and we know we got to make money on the stolen underwear, but it's really up to the partnerships and the leadership at the regional level to define that middle piece. How do you get from here to there, to the North Star, to the making money on stolen underwear, I guess. And finally, the state plan does talk the strategic plan, which is an absolutely wonderful read. It's 1,000 pages written by government bureaucrats. It is such a page turner. In essence, it talks about all the things I discussed, how to connect income mobility and regional prosperity, because these, again, are two sides of the same coin. It's an operations manual. It's not an operations manual. I said that completely backwards. It's a framework for regional coalitions to develop, do the kinds of things I talked about on those other slides, to get to scale, get big impacts in terms of income mobility, employment impacts, but also to drive economic development. This is where workforce development and economic development, I think, have that sweet spot and really come together. And I'll just leave you with this. Martin Luther King was, in March 68, talking to sanitation workers. This was a time toward the end of his life where he was really connecting civil rights and economic rights, which is a very dangerous thing, and it will get you killed. But this is the kind of stuff we're talking about. I won't read this out loud because every time I do, I get choked up. So you take a second to lead it, and I'll go sit down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. And now we will hear from our next speaker, Chris.
Oh, thank you. Where's the beer?
Thank you, President Ochoa, for inviting me here. I have to say I'm a little intimidated and nervous being on the stage for several reasons. One is I have to follow Tim Rainey. And I don't have nearly as good jokes as he does. And part of the problem is I'm an economist. And you know the kind of person who becomes an economist? It's someone who's good at math but doesn't have an entertaining enough personality to become an accountant. No offense, President Ochoa. I know you're an economist also. It doesn't apply to you either. The other challenge, of course, is that I'm the university professor on this panel, sandwiched between two practitioners who are actually on the ground listening to employers and workforce providers or being an employer. And so I guess my role on this panel is to say, you know, Tim, that's all very well to work in practice, but does it work in theory? So I guess I was put on this panel in part. We had this kind of logical order where Tim was going to talk about the statewide plan and the vision and the direction things were going. I was going to talk about sort of the regional processes and patterns and sort of bring it down to that level. And Rick Antela is going to be talking about sort of the experience on really on the ground, literally on the ground, planting in the ground of labor. It's very dangerous, though, to ask a professor to say what you want them to say because, of course, professors aren't used to saying what others want them to say. So I took this opportunity to think a little more broadly about building a workforce for the 21st century economy, and I promise I will ground it in the region. But I want to talk a bit about workers in the 21st century, work and what that looks like in the 21st century, and then a little bit about markets, and particularly labor markets as the primary institution that is really designed to help facilitate labor's contribution to our economy and growth over time. So first is just a reminder, in California, we became a majority-minority state in roughly 1998, so about 18 years ago. Just in the last year or two, Latinos passed non-Hispanic whites as the largest racial group in the state. And by 2040, 40% through the century, over half the population of California will be Latino. When you look at Santa Cruz and Monterey County, we're even more predominantly Latino. So in 2010, it's about 47% non-Hispanic white. This is the core workforce, sort of 25 to 64 population. But again, majority Latino by the end of this decade. And then when you look at the youth population in the region, those who are the future workforce, we're already at those under 18, 65% in Santa Cruz and Monterey County are Latino. At least, and growing to 75% by halfway through the century. And so one of the key messages from that is that if we want to be thinking about preparing a workforce for the 21st century, probably the most important priority is early childhood education. Right? Kids before kindergarten getting the preparation so they can get into the school system and get the effective growth over time. And of course, we have to be thinking about the full life course, but investing at that early stage is absolutely critical for our Latino youth in the region. Now, one of the challenges we face in this transition that Tim talked about of baby boomers retiring and younger generation coming in is what my colleague Manuel Pastor calls the racial generation gap. And this is a chart that shows in the red line for California, that top line is the percentage of the senior population that are white, non-Hispanic white. That bottom line is the percentage of the youth population who are non-Hispanic white. So we have a predominantly community of color of youth populations, and we have this gap in the racial percentage. What's critical about that is if you look at the size of that gap, the disparity in the racial composition of the senior population to the youth population, and compare it to per capita spending in public education, those places that have the greatest disparity in that racial generation gap are the ones that spend the lowest money on public education. And there's California right down near the bottom. And of course, you can imagine why that's the case, is because those who are, more senior and elder leaders in our society are the ones who tend to vote more frequently. They're more active in leadership, and they don't have kids as much because they're beyond that stage and have less of a sense of the priorities in investing in public and higher education. And I think this is part of the reason why even in our higher education systems, the community colleges, CSUs, and the University of California, why we're facing some of the financial challenges we're facing at the moment. It's the racial dimension of that. So when we're thinking about preparing a workforce for the 21st century, we have to think about racial equity as a critical component to that. So let me talk about this second issue, which is thinking about the transformation of work that's going on. And if you can imagine 40, 50 years ago, whether it's a GE or General Motors or US Steel, you know, the technology wasn't changing, the work was continuing through. You can have multiple generations in the same factory doing the same kind of work. But imagine the companies of today. You know, Uber, which claims it actually has no employees, they're independent contractors who are driving the cars. Airbnb has every night 1.5 million rooms that are rented out in 35,000 cities, 15,000 cities around the world. It's double the size of Hilton, the largest hotel chain in the world. And yet Airbnb has about 2,500 employees. And Hilton has not 10 times, but 100 times as many employees. So what does that mean about sort of the type of work? Well, one thing to think about is the educational requirements. And we often talk about the importance of higher education. And yet when you look at the jobs that are actually being created today, only about a third of them, that's that top line, the black line, is the percentage of jobs needing a bachelor's degree or higher in California in the next decade. It's only about 36%. So that means there's a lot of jobs out there that require middle skills, maybe an AA degree, some kind of technical skills, as well as a lot of jobs that are being created that don't require that level of higher education. And it's interesting to look again at the racial dimensions of the educational attainment of our population in California. And again, seen in those middle categories there, the Latino population, US-born, and Latino immigrant population with much less educational attainment compared to what's required in the job market. But what's clearly shifting in terms of the jobs that are being created is that if your job is routine, and that doesn't mean necessarily just routine physical labor, it can be routine mental labor as well, it's being automated and computerized, increasingly intelligent machine learning and automatic algorithms. What this chart shows is in those red lines, the net job change in both manual and cognitive jobs that are routine. And essentially all the net job growth since 2000 has been in jobs that are not routine, that require some creative thinking, creative engagement, where the work day to day is different. Now, it's interesting when I saw this next slide, which shows the percentage of jobs in a metropolitan region that are in that routine category. And it turns out that regions that have a higher percentage of jobs that are in routine occupations are predominantly Republican voting regions in the last election. Now, this is a correlation, not causation, so I'm not trying to make any jokes here about Trump or anyone else. But I think there are some interesting correlations between the level of economic insecurity and people's concern about where our country is going and what kind of solutions out there they're looking for. So this has really important implications for our whole society, not just the labor market. Now, one of the issues, of course, is then, as we're talking about the 12 jobs that all of you students out there will have before you're age 25 or 26, was it, Tim? Which jobs are going to be available 10 or 20 years from now? And when you look at the jobs that are out there of what could possibly be automated, replaced by computers or robots or machinery, it's a very interesting study here that was quite interesting looking at last night at the bar after a drink or two. This is an effort to try and look at all the occupations in the US economy. And on that X scale, to assess the extent to which they're likely to be automated or computerized in the next 10 to 15 years or so. And so on the far right scale, you can essentially say these ones over here on the right are the ones that are most likely to be automated sooner. It's roughly, if you look at that 70%, 0.7 mark, about 47% of all employment in the US is in occupations that could pretty easily be computerized and automated in the next 10 or 15 years. So those are not the jobs you want to be aspiring to if you're a student. So the fear, of course, is that the robots are coming, technology's coming, this is a problem, it's displacing work, what's the work of the future going to be? And of course, this isn't the first time in human history that people have been concerned about technology and its impact on work in the labor market. Many of you have probably heard of the Luddites. The Luddites have a reputation of being anti-technology. It was at a time when machines were being introduced into the manufacture of textiles in England, and workers smashed the machines that they, in theory, were interpreting as replacing them in the jobs. Turns out, so on the left there is Ned Ludd, whose address was his office in Sherwood Forest, which should raise some questions for you. It turns out Ned Ludd was not a real person. And the Luddites, in fact, were not protesting technology in the work. It was a time of major economic insecurity, at a time when technology was being introduced in the textile industry and rapidly expanding the number of jobs that were available in the industry because it was reducing the cost of producing the goods. They were concerned about the low wages and working conditions and the ways that some employers were bringing in new workers and paying them lower wages, and so they were smashing the machinery to protect that. And it points to the importance, in my mind, of not demonizing technology, because technology is just utilized by different people in different ways and has the tremendous potential to increase economic output and productivity and job creation, but to pay attention to our social and political institutions that determine who's benefiting from these economic restructuring. And as we look forward at new jobs in the economy, we often get told or talk about the importance of STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. There was a very interesting study by an organization in Silicon Valley called Institute for the Future that was really trying to look at major disruptors in the economy and what are the kinds of skills that would be needed in the 21st century workforce. And the kind of things that they identified were not so much the STEM fields, although in fact the STEM fields underpin all of these. But it's these things like sense-making, the ability to determine the deeper meaning or significance of what's being expressed, social intelligence, novel and adaptive thinking, cross-cultural competency, the computational thinking, cognitive load management. This is what I need to figure out, is how do you interpret all the information that we're being bombarded with every day and discriminate and filter it for importance and understand how to maximize our engagement with that information. And these are the kinds of things that you have to learn through practice, through engagement. Much of it actually gets trained through engagement with the humanities and arts and music. And so we need to understand that it's not the narrow, repeatable, routine science and technology and research that's part of that, but these broader set of skills. So coming to the kind of last topic I wanted to look at, which is thinking about markets and the labor market that, Tim's really talking about the state trying to help organize and, what are the institutions that can help make this better connection between job seekers and people who have jobs to offer. This chart I did not design myself. This was actually put together by three Nobel Prize winning economists who won the Nobel Prize for looking at markets with significant friction in them. But the labor market is a complex, maze-driven place. But if labor markets are working properly, there's essentially two things they should do. One is help direct people, labor, to those productive areas of the economy where it can lead to job growth, where it can lead to economic growth, where people can, make a productive contribution to the economy. And jobs are the primary way that, in theory, we distribute the national income, the wealth that's produced, to individuals. So how are we doing on that first category in our new knowledge-driven economy that's so different from the manufacturing economy of the past? Well, first is to recognize that, in fact, our economy has become much more sluggish over the last 50 or 60 years. What this bar chart shows is the average pace of economic growth, annual GDP growth, by decade. And in the 50s and 60s, we used to average 4 to 4.5% growth a year. By the 70s, it was dropping to 3%. We're now at a place where 1.5 to 2% is essentially a good pace of economic growth in our economy. So why is it that we aren't growing so fast? And of course, there's lots of debates about it, but I wanted to highlight a couple different things. One is to think about the largest economies in our region, in our largest companies in our economy, in our region, and to understand, well, why is it that Apple is so valuable? And when you really dig deep into the origins and the development of the iPhone, and this is not my work, this is a work by an economist named Mariana Mazzucato, who wrote a book called The Entrepreneurial State. And what you realize is that most of the major technological advancements that underpin the iPhone got their start in public sector investment. Much of it through the Department of Defense, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, actually. CERN is a Swiss-based research institution. In many ways, the public sector serves as a very early stage venture capitalist, investing in the development of major cross-cutting technologies like the internet that are far too risky to invest in at the early stage of development for a private sector investor to get in. But the challenge we have is that the incentives for the state to invest in this early stage development are not well structured, because the state doesn't take an equity stake in the further development of this enterprise. We assume that that gets distributed through society through companies that build on this technology and make the wonderful new products like the iPhone, and then the public sector takes that out through taxes. But part of what happens in this process is that a few different companies are taking advantage of what are essentially economic rents, technological rents, and making tremendous profit out of that, where you have actually the majority of the society who are not benefiting from the technology in the profits that are generated from it in the same way. So there's something we have to think about of the distribution of that technological advancement. And here's another example of thinking about what makes Google and Amazon and Facebook and eBay and all these other companies so valuable. And at least part of the value that's created through them is their ability to connect people and the contribution that we all make as consumers to the value of their product. Now, if you think about consuming a refrigerator or an automobile or something like that, you add no value to the product by your consumption of it. But every time you search for something on Google and click through, you're adding value to Google's product. Every time you, in fact, drive in your car and your GPS is tracking your movement, and then that allows Google, through the telephone companies, to show traffic patterns on the road, you're adding value to that process through Facebook, through all those things that are going on. And yet there's no mechanism for us measuring the value created that we as consumers, not as workers, but as consumers, provide to that thing. Now, of course, we get great free products like searching for Google, and that works fine as long as enough people have jobs. But if value in the economy is being created not just by labor power, but by consumer power and social networks and the ability to communicate and connect with a variety of different people, how do we recognize that in the livelihoods that people have? So finally, that second part of what labor markets should do is distribute national income broadly in a way that people have decent livelihoods. And I could bore you for the next probably hour with statistics about inequality in the country. I bore my students at Santa Cruz with that for actually a whole quarter on these kind of statistics, but they pay me for that privilege, so I won't bore you for that long. But this is just a basic statistic of the percentage of total income in the country that's captured by the top 10% of income earners. And the key point is that we're at points of economic inequality in this country that we haven't seen since the Great Depression of 1929. But part of my argument is that this is structural in many important ways. And there's a couple of different ways to think about it. One is that when you look at companies that are some of the largest employers and most valuable companies in the economy today, you have a company like McDonald's where its average revenue per employee is $60,000. Right? There's no way McDonald's can raise their wages dramatically to provide a decent livelihood in a fast food restaurant unless we're going to dramatically increase the price of the Big Macs that we buy. And yet you look at a company like Facebook and their average revenue per employee is almost $1.5 million, right? And that's structural. And then we also have to think about, well, what are the things in society that we need that are continually going to be there regardless of the high-tech products and services that are being created? Food is one of the critical aspects of that. How many of you can imagine an economy without food being produced and distributed? Yeah, no? 1 out of 6 private sector jobs are in the food system from farm to fork, to restaurants and grocery. But here's part of the challenge. 8 of the 10 lowest paying occupations are in the food system. Most of those are in restaurants, not in the fields, right? It's the dishwashers, it's the bussers, it's all those things that are going on. And one of the things we actually desperately need is improved productivity throughout the food system. Increased application of technology to increase the profit margins and improve that over time. But food, education, healthcare, if you look at the largest growing occupations out there now, home health care, home health aides, similar, somewhat low-paying healthcare jobs are a key part of that. So how do we deal with these structural inequalities? There's also an increasing disconnection from overall productivity in the economy and what labor is rewarded for that. I mean, if you look from the 1940s up to roughly today, productivity growth for labor has been roughly continual across that. And from roughly the 1940s to the early 1970s, the average compensation for labor paralleled almost exactly. But as we started entering this knowledge economy, and there's a bunch of other things going on with declining unionization rates and growing deregulation, wages for workers have stagnated over that time. So we're seeing greater inequality in that sense. But the final point about sort of thinking about the conditions for workers and preparing a workforce for the 21st century economy is to look at, well, how do people actually survive in this economy? What are the livelihoods that people have? And of course, wages are still a very large part of overall livelihoods, but it's now down to about 50% of total personal income that comes from wages and salaries. So what is the rest of the pie? Well, of course, some of it is the benefits associated with work that are now tied predominantly to the workplace, to a job. But in this world where we're constantly moving from job to job to job is less efficiently done that way. So that's healthcare and other benefits. This one is, what is that one? Income on assets. So it's returns to capital in different ways. This is Social Security, and then there's a variety of other sort of small business sectors. But part of the point there is that we need to be thinking about livelihoods, not just wages and salaries. So now that I've probably discouraged you dramatically, continuing on Tim's great inspirational theme, I also want to talk about some solutions quickly. The first thing is coming from completely different directions. We've similarly converged on the importance of regional leadership networks, regional knowledge networks. The book that I just released last fall with Manuel Pastor is called Equity, Growth, and Community. We were looking at regions across the country that were successful in both above average economic growth and above average social equity metrics. And it turns out that those regions that are particularly successful have very dense and diverse knowledge networks between different constituencies by sector, by industry, by public, private, nonprofit, et cetera, that allows them to promote greater innovation, to identify new and diverse economic opportunities, which, by the way, much of that is international. Our growing middle class in Mexico and Brazil and India and China is a tremendous economic opportunity for this country, and we should be promoting immigration that facilitates that. But critically, too, is the ability to respond to economic restructuring in a coordinated, collaborative fashion. So we're not wasting time fighting over how are we restructuring and developing, but can recognize through detailed knowledge, through information, what's going on in our economy, and direct resources to those sectors that need support and need benefits in ways that simple labor markets will not. If you're interested in this book, it's actually available free. We're busy sharing knowledge at that website, growingtogethermetro.org. I think the second thing is to really think about how do we expand what academics call the social wage systems, the various ways that people have livelihoods in between and outside of regular wage labor or salary labor. So of course, Social Security, one of the most popular federal benefit programs, is a key part of that. Healthcare is a part of that. We need to ensure universal health coverage that's not linked to a single job so that people can move around. And I should mention that people who study this say that one of the major obstacles to entrepreneurship in this country is a workplace-based health system. Because the most successful entrepreneurs are people who are, in their 30s or 40s, they have some experience, they have some connections, they're ready to jump out on their own. But when healthcare is super expensive and you have family to support, or maybe you're beginning to worry about your own health, that becomes a barrier to people willing to take the risk to start new businesses. Housing is a critical part of that, and we need to expand our affordable housing system overall. Higher education, we pay for free higher education through grade 12, and that's been in place at a time when a grade 12 education was a pathway to a decent job. And today, you really do require an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree to have a higher paid position, so we should subsidize education more. People are even talking now about a universal basic income, an idea that's been around since Thomas Paine and our founding fathers and has been advocated for by both the left and the right of the political spectrum. So it's worth considering. And finally, as we think about training people for jobs in the 21st century economy, I think we need to not think about training. We need to think about learning and lifelong learning. And what's required in that process is the networks and social relationships and connections across boundaries that allow people to learn and understand what are the new directions the economy is going and how do they learn from others about the new skills that are important, and really building those networks. And I'll just mention the program that I run at UC Santa Cruz, the Everett program, which focuses on this connection between digital tools and technology and social innovation. Tries to do this with this is just one example, of working with high school Latina girls in Watsonville, where one of the things we've done is focus on knowledge about how to get into college. The College Mentor app is a app that you can download on Android or iOS that high school girls from Watsonville programmed in a week without any previous programming knowledge. Because they come in and get motivated by learning this knowledge, and they're learning not from some professor. They're learning from undergraduates at UC Santa Cruz who just the year before were in their same circumstances. And they're programming the app geared for their peers in the school. And so they can organize and think about it. How do you organize this information in a way that their peers can understand? And so it's that peer-to-peer and what we call near-to-peer learning that is really critical. We're doing some new app development work now about new technologies in the food system, including ag tech, that we're quite excited about moving ahead. And so with that, I'll thank you for your time and attention. And if you're interested in that Everett program, there's a website. And look forward to your questions and answers in the next session after Rick has a chance to talk. Thank you.
So now we're going to hear from somebody who really has to make this work in practice, Rick Antle.
Well, welcome, and thank you for having me here, Dr. Ochoa, and thank all of you for being here and to learn a little bit about the agriculture and what role it plays here in our local community. We're looking at some interesting things as we move forward, and that's not a mistake here, guys. We employ women and men doing the same job, and it's a little bit different than what it used to be with it was all male braceros in the 1960s, but the world has changed. And right here in Monterey County, it was just, this is the economics of our county. Agriculture obviously is the big driver, the tourism, hospitality, higher ed and research. We've got the DLI, we've got CSUMB, we've got the Naval Postgraduate School, and then at the bottom our military and government. So clearly agriculture is the driver in our community here. But what do we have here? It's, we have a workforce that's skilled in trades, okay? There's just not a lot of jobs, really, when you look at the big mass, that really requires this college degree. So what are we really looking for in a workforce? How are we attracting it? That's the part that I want to hopefully share with you guys. Headline of February 5th, Los Angeles Times. There was an article relative to turning farm workers' children into computer scientists. It was an expose on some of the work being done over in Salinas. It discussed Hartnell College that's in conjunction with CSUMB here. We're 2 years at Hartnell on a track to go into the computer science program here. 84% of the students coming out of that are actually being accepted and are coming on into CSUMB, which is absolutely fabulous. The dilemma is only 2% of the Salinas workforce is engaged in the computer science industry, okay? I mean, Silicon Valley's close, a lot of jobs up there, hopefully, for them, but really right down here, there's not a lot of it. So really, what is the opportunity? You know, how can we educate and move us forward? People talk a lot about ag technology, but what's really happening in it? The reality is our labor pool is shrinking. You know, you guys have heard Donald Trump stand up, talk about what he wants to do, and I'm here to tell you there is a fence. It's already built. If he would come out and visit us in Arizona, and he can actually see it. There's a large fence. But in 1970, the biggest concern about was automation displacing the workforce. Okay, the University of California developed the tomato picker. Cesar Chavez and the UFW said, wait a minute, this is going to eliminate our jobs. The mandate from the governor was there'll be no more research into automation on the farm. And that's the last time the University of California did any work on that. Today's concern for us is how fast can we automate? We just don't have a labor force. But the opportunity, again, that's going to be is what education must help close this gap between what production is and innovation. Now, I was walking through the parking lot or driving down, I saw plant pathology lab. But how many labs here at this university actually go out in the field, take field trips? We've got a wonderful, wonderful valley here, very close. You can come over and look. Because the irony of the whole thing is, a lot of think tanks want to come down. I get a call every day. Rick, we want to come down and learn about your business, or Rick, we've got a great idea for you. But the fact is, they don't know anything about our business. And so in order to innovate, you have to know what the business is. You got to know what a head of lettuce is from a cabbage. And that's the big dislink. Okay, I'll tell you a quick story. You know, food safety is a big thing now. And we had a recall, potential recall. Got a call that they were on their way down to investigate it. And the first thing, the lady came in and said, where's the cilantro trees that I need to look at? So Gourmel, our food scientist, was very patient. He was a professor at one point. He took her and he says, before we go look for the cilantro trees, let me take you for a drive on the farm. And I want to show you the work and the things. And 4 hours later, she was convinced that the cilantro doesn't go on a tree. And she was more convinced that cilantro wasn't the real problem. So it was just that type of outreach that's lacking, okay? Who are we? Tanimur and Antle. We were formed in 1982. It's two families. It's the Tanimurs and the Antles. We farm about 40,000 acres. We grow premium produce, primarily leafy lettuces, everything that's in a salad, celery, broccoli, cauliflower. And it's all built around our distribution because what we have is products that grow in the fields, but most importantly, they all go in your refrigerator. So it's 32-degree products. A salad obviously includes a tomato. But tomatoes don't grow, or tomatoes don't ship at 32 degrees. If tomatoes did, we'd be also growing tomatoes. 2,400 employees at any one time, but it takes 7,000 employees during the year to have 2,400 at any given time. Now, in 1982, that number would have probably been 2,400 and 3,000 because about 80% of the workforce used to travel back and forth. They were migratory. Today, they've set the roots down. They're part of the communities. You know, these people are earning enough money that they could come in, have the American dream. The children go to school, the children go to college, the children become a working part of the community. And our payroll is not small. It's a couple $1 million a week. It's a major factor what we're able to invest into the community is through our workforce. This is a great picture here. Sam in the center was one of their original foremen. He's now since retired. Very inspirational individual. And this reflects the Sam Carrillo Award winners. And as you can see, it's kind of a diverse group. We've got Maria and Raul. Colin over there on the end, he's also Santa Claus. He also is Jewish, so. So how are we going to meet our future labor needs? One of the ways that we're going to look at this is through our H2A workforce. Another one is our educational partnerships, automate and innovate, and of course it's attract, retain, and motivate. So the first is a Department of Labor program. You may heard of it. It's the H2A program. What this allows is a foreign national to come work legally in the United States with documentation. They go through a long background. We have to provide housing. We have to provide their transportation. And one of the issues that people really don't realize is I can't use that unless every single domestic worker that applies for me has been given an opportunity. So we don't use that here in Salinas, and I'll explain a little bit more in the future about that, the program we worked on. But in Arizona, that today is about 800 of our workers, about 1/3 of our labor force. And then 8 years ago, it was 0. And what happened 8 years ago? We had the heightened enforcement on the borders of the Border Patrol. And literally they came, and if you had an undocumented worker, what did you do? Some went back to Mexico. Some of them got farther away from the border. So there, you know, the issue is very dynamic. Immigration reform is something that doesn't want to be dealt with. A lot of people think that this is the answer. I can tell you it's not the answer. We would really rather not do this. There's a lot of regulatory, there's a lot of strings attached to it, and we'd much rather have a domestic labor force that'll reinvest their dollars in the community versus taking their money at the end of the year and going back to their village in Mexico. Picture of some of the guys that actually there are actually H2 workers. Our educational partnerships, a lot of scholarships. We do these. We do them through the company, through the Tanamura Foundation, through my mom and my father's foundation scholarships. We believe that if there's a student that's got a will and a way, and they can see and be a benefit to America, we're going to try to help them get a chance. A lot of internships. We typically target junior and senior level. We're giving them the real world experience, but I'll be real honest with you, they are providing a service to us, but they're also being interviewed while they're doing it. And today about a little over 30% of all of our interns have gone on to management careers at TNA, and many, many, many more have gone on to management roles in the ag industry. If anybody's here is interested in internships, we actually have a website. You can go on that. You can also go on our website and see some of the job offerings that we have. And then we look at collaborations with CSUMB, Hartnell College, Cal Poly, some of the other feeder schools. Automation is a key part of what we're going to do. We're trying to automate anything we can as quickly as we can. I'll make no bones about it. And one of those innovations that we have is the plant tape system. We're in the final phases of the development program of this. It was a machine that allows us to grow the baby plants in a greenhouse in a very nurturing environment, very minimal amount of water, minimal amount of space required for this. And it allows us to have higher productivity on the farm. So hopefully we'll have higher yields, which means we get more produce for less water, means we get more produce for less inputs. But it's totally automated. That machine will do the work of about 50 workers. We call it 17 to 1, but it's really higher than that because the machine works the equivalent of 3. So that machine with 1 driver and 2 technicians on the back literally can plant about 40 acres a day. So when you see it go through the field, a normal machine will run maybe at 2 miles an hour. This runs at about 6 miles an hour. So it spends more time turning around at the end of the row than it does actually running. And we're working on that. Attract and retain and motivate is obviously the most important thing that you can do as an employer. And what we find is most of our management, middle managers especially, been just people that came up out through the fields. And this is your typical career path and the earnings that they would make. A harvester makes our base salary is $12.50, but we've got incentives for them that get them up to the $16 to $18 an hour earnings. Then they go into a secondary, maybe an assistant to the 4-person. See the 4-person there at the 55s, supervisor, manager, director, et cetera. And there's this like path for the farm labor. You'll see a little disparity in the pay there because those people don't travel. Okay, they're able to set themselves down. The top group, they actually move with us. If you're management with us, you're actually living in the remote locations for half the year. But that's not all, it's nice to be in the weather all the time, but there are some other benefits. This is Doris. Doris is one of our 4-persons, and she started with us 16 years ago as a lettuce cutter. And over her career, she cut lettuce. Then she became a bus driver who got extra pay for, working during the day, and then they drove the buses. And now she's making her 55, but then that's her base salary, She has another opportunity to make another $10,000 based on her own personal performance. Last year, she made another $10,000 because of the company's performance. And then she gets paid about another $10,000 tax-free to offset her living expenses while she's living in Arizona or the outlying remote locations. So, good year last year. Doris made $75,000 plus another $10,000 more or less for living expenses for the time she's away from home. The reality for us really hit home last year when we came back to Salinas. This was the first time since 1982 we were not able to fill all of our labor needs. We'd taken labor for granted. We were more used to turning people away than we were going out and recruiting. We calculated that at the end of the season, we still had 284 harvest positions unfilled. We lost crops, and it was clearly that labor demand exceeded our supply. And as we dove into this, we realized the big thing here was our lack of affordable housing and what it does to the labor supply. So when we, last year, mid-April, we said we're going to have to do something. And it really looked for us that we were going to have to bring an H-2A program here. Not something we wanted to do, but we were facing no alternatives. We didn't see any immigration reform coming down the path. And so we went forward with the county and identified a piece of property that we have on our ranch. Now, some of the statistics here is in 2014, only 26% could afford to buy a house, down from 35%. 17% of our citizens here in Monterey County live below the poverty level. Salinas specifically, the 4th fastest growing rental prices in California. Half of the renters pay 35% of their earnings to rent. In 2012, it was estimated that we lacked at least 2,000 rental units. And last year alone, rent went up 12.4%. Now, the people that are renting are not the high-income people, are they? Okay. So what did we do? We saw the need. We looked like we were going to have to do the H2, so we designed and built the buildings. There's 100 2-bedroom, 2-bath. Each of them has the capacity to hold 8 employees. They all have kitchens, living areas. We have an on-store site and some other amenities for them. It's only for adults because it's for our workforce, okay? And, it's just not a right place to be trying to raise a family with the environment. And we absolutely believe that all of our employees are entitled to a safe community with affordable housing, something we don't have in Salinas. You know, we've got a lot of housing. Somebody will ask, you know, where were all these people living before? There was that many, you know, piled on top of each other in houses. You know, there's stories of 20 people in a house commuting 100 miles to go to work every day. So what are our expectations? We announced that we were going to build our housing, and we started hearing that we had workers that were interested, people that were living in the San Joaquin Valley, some of them down in Ventura. And we did some polling, and we found that it was very likely that we weren't going to have to use the H-2 program, that we would be able to take people that are otherwise unemployed, be able to house them, provide them a work opportunity, and to meet our needs. So it's a win-win situation for us. Now, if that changes, we've designed it and built it to the H-2 standard, but we'd much rather employ domestic labor. You're going to hear about this. There's already a couple proposals that have gone on down in the southern Salinas Valley. And the biggest expectation we have is to continue to cultivate, you know, future generations and give them the opportunity to come here. Because frankly, an employee thrives, the family thrives, the community thrives. So I'll thank you, and Dr. Cho, I think you're next.
Well, that was a wonderful set of presentations, and I think that you know they're so complementary. And you know your last presentation by Rick, I think, really gave us, I think, was a bracing dose of reality. Very, very, very stimulating. And I have to, before I start posing some questions to the panel, I can't suppress making some comments because I have to say I feel that, you know, CSUMB is really being validated by some of the things that have been said here today, particularly the way that we're working to lead a cradle-to-career educational partnership with K-12 and other stakeholders in our county. And also, we're also being mindful of the fact that this connects to the workplace, to the creation of jobs, and to the future economic development of the region. And so we're very fortunate to be working in tandem with the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership that is doing good work in connecting communities around the Monterey Bay area, beyond Monterey County, including Santa Cruz and San Benito counties. So that's good news to hear that we're on the right track. I also can't help but make a teasing comment to Tim. You know, you had that slide with all of the bubbles that were eventually aligned. You left out UC.
It's because Tim and I know each other a long time. So
That's right.
so
Yeah.
CSU, but he gets a dig in every time.
I had it on there because Chris was here. I took it off. So.
The other thing that Chris mentioned is the critical role of early childhood education. And I think that's also very validating for us. We're working very closely with the Early Childhood Development Initiative in the county. And in fact, the work that's gone on in our Bright Futures partnership so far has identified about 7 critical indicators to focus on, but 2 I would call the tent poles of the effort. And one of them is being college and career ready when you come out of high school. That transition is critical. But the other one is childcare and having kids ready for kindergarten. So that's those are going to be the 2 biggest ones that we're going to focus on initially. I also wanted to make another sort of nitpicky economist comment. I looked at that graph that you put up with that shows the correlation between the racial generation gap and the level of educational spending. And you're right, you know, that the line that best fits all those points shows that inverse relationship. But there was a lot of variation between states that wasn't accounted for that. So it does show that this is not an iron law, that a lot of other factors can influence that. And so it gives us hope that by introducing other factors, political will, cultural factors, building community bonds, we can actually influence that in directions that wouldn't be predicted by that relationship. Yeah, that's. And then I thought Rick's point is critical for us in terms of the role that we can play in the education sector vis-a-vis the county, which is that right now you've got a critical shortage of unskilled labor, but in fact you're automating as quickly as you can. And it's clear that the direction is for those kinds of jobs to go down in number. And the more you automate it, the more you use technology, the greater there will be the need for the skilled workforce that we're preparing here. So I think that, again, I think that seems to be pointing us in the right direction. So let's talk about, and we've got some questions that are being collected, but I have a few here now. Have I preempted them all with my comments? Let's see.
Look at that
thank you.
stack. Wow.
All right, we'll go with these since they got here in time. Okay, here's a very, very specific question just to warm things up. Rick, there's a question for Tana Morin-Antle, which is the housing that you've developed open for male and female workers?
Yes, it's for both male and female.
Okay. And here's a long one. Let's see. So for those of us who hope to take advantage of new employment opportunities by replacing retiring baby boomers, should we be prepared to discover, is there a danger that a significant percentage of these jobs may actually be eliminated as people retire? Or will enough new jobs be created to make up for those that will be eliminated? I guess it's a question for the economists in the group, huh?
Yeah, I forgot to mention with that beautiful smiley face chart that I had that, these are economists who are forecasting ahead 15, 20 years from now. And you probably know why economists invented forecasting. It was to make weather forecasters look good. No one can predict the future. And part of what they're looking at is, where automatic algorithms are, artificial intelligence, kind of machine learning, and just trying to project forward of what's happening with that. And I think we can all see it. I mean, I forgot to go through the details of those occupations, but some of the occupations that are most likely to disappear are in the office administrative functions, the kinds of things that could be taken care of through automatic voice recognition systems and being able to talk to your computer rather than typing. Much of that has already been lost. Driving positions with self-driving cars, that is part of that, and truck drivers is probably the first place that's going to happen on sort of interstate long-distance trucking. And we can imagine in 10 and 15 years, those kind of jobs are going. I have not done an analysis that looks at those occupations looking at the age profile of who's employed in them, so I don't have a direct answer to that question. But I think the key point is we have to stop thinking about the job. We have to think about work and livelihoods. Because work is about how do we, what are the skills and knowledge and social relationships and engagement that people engage in to create value in the economy. And we want to be maximizing that, and we want to take the full advantage of technology to create the kind of abundant, sustainable economy that we can imagine. And then we have to figure out how everyone in our society, as a basic human right of existence in our society, has at least a minimum basic livelihood to survive. as well as the incentives to pursue, work moving ahead. And so that's why, we can talk about jobs, and jobs are important, but I think we need to also be talking about all the other livelihood factors that are part of that as well.
So that's you've opened up a whole new line of conversation that's very intriguing to me, but it might take us a bit far afield from workforce preparation. So before I go there, let me ask you a little more focused question, which is the assumption in trying to forecast future occupations and what's going to happen to them is that the jobs are created first, and then people will or will not be available to meet them. But there is also another approach, which our fellow economists that published the book The Race Between Education and Technology also pointed out, that sometimes the skilled labor force can lead the job creation and can influence the type of jobs that are created. If you've got the skilled labor force, then skilled occupations or skilled activities will emerge, will be capitalized on by firms. So how important is that factor, and should we be, in terms of regional development in this region, should we say, the heck with it, let's train the workforce and the jobs will come? Can the skilled labor, in fact, create an opportunity for jobs moving to the area to take advantage of them? Or how important is that
the
factor?
point I would make is actually bring in one that Rick talked about, which is the motivation of people in the workforce is absolutely critical in identifying new innovations, in creating new markets. And I think that's true at every level. I mean, people who are picking strawberries are tremendously skilled. And often the whole system of harvesting and the kinds of technologies that are used in that to improve their productivity, it's the people actually picking the lettuce and the strawberries, et cetera, that can give tremendous insight into how to structure the harvesting machines and designs in ways that can maximize their labor. So it's not just the highly skilled workforce that can provide innovations that create new economic value. I think we can see that across labor market spectrums. And I think your point of getting away from the model of, here's the demand in the labor market, how do we provide the supply, to a system that recognizes we need communication signals back and forth all the time, and that, as you pointed out, the growth in the economy can be as much driven by the workforce and people working as the higher levels in the company as well.
Okay, good. Back to Rick, I want to ask you a question here that was very specific from the audience. Do the salaries that were shown, such as $30,000 for a harvester and $40,000 for a row person, do those include benefits such as healthcare, retirement for TNA workers?
So those are just the base pay. And so everybody, since 1982, we've provided a full medical benefit program. We have a retirement program, vacation pay, bereavement pay, jury pay. So those are just the absolute basis, yeah.
Excellent. Okay. More, all right. Well, the question, there's several questions that have been suggested around the issue of immigration. How does this play into it? What impact how do you see whether we develop some sort of a path toward legalization, for the undocumented workers here? Would that impact the situation in our county in terms of the workforce, or even in California? I would open it up to anybody, any one of you, to comment on that.
Yeah, I'll just say that a couple of different things. One is that, as I alluded to in my talk, I think the international ties and connections is a critical part of thinking about growth going forward, and that we should be encouraging sort of greater movement of people back and forth, because that'll strengthen those economic ties. We also know that immigrants of all ethnicities tend to be more entrepreneurial than US-born people of the same ethnicities. Greater levels of self-employment, greater levels of new business creation. Sometimes that's out of necessity because of not being able to work legally, but often it comes from just a certain amount of self-selection, that people are willing to take the risk to move to another country, tend to be those real go-getters and movers as well. Our colleague Manuel Pastor has done some calculations about the economic boost that would come from legalization and a path to citizenship of undocumented residents of our country. And I don't have the figures at the top of my head, but even in California, there's a very significant economic boost that would come from a path to citizenship, because it means that people could, earn what would be a normal wage in the positions that they're working in, which leads to greater consumer power and all that goes along with that. So I think simply from economic considerations, much less the human rights issue, there's a very strong argument for path to citizenship and, responsible increasing growth in immigration, I would say.
So here's a very interesting question from another practitioner. What advice would you give a career pathway coach who's new at his job to give to an at-risk youth between 16 and 24 in our communities? And these youth are currently working towards a high school diploma.
Who said that? I mean, I'm so glad that there's somebody in the audience working with at-risk youth. I mean, one of the biggest challenges and all across the state is the level of disconnection, right? That's youth who are neither in school nor in a job. I mean, the numbers are so high that it just points to this incredible tragedy across the state of California. So if you're working with at-risk youth, hats off to you. It's very difficult, challenging work. There are resources available, obviously, locally to help young people access education and training to get them on a good career path. So there's a question where you want to send them in terms of a good job, career path. Yeah.
Right here. Yeah, I mean, they're getting their diploma.
Yeah.
While they're currently being potentially influenced to go into higher education or vocational training. And so just kind of where you see our regions, just potential. Yeah, I don't know, just any advice how you would approach at-risk youth as opposed to students that may already have some pathway.
Right, but both. I would say it's not either or, it's both and. A vocational pathway is a good one. There are lots of job openings for workers who have less than a bachelor's degree, but some level of training beyond high school. That's what we call middle skill. In fact, the retirements that are coming over the next 10 years, that's impacting that middle skill probably more than anything else, even the high skill. But opportunities around education and training where that individual is going to have a vocation and a potential career there, but the opportunity the opportunity to pursue higher education so he or she can get a bachelor's degree later is the way you want to sort of set it up. But yeah, a vocational pathway is a great one. My brother is an electrician, and he makes twice as much money as I do. He didn't go to college. I shouldn't have. I don't know why I went to college. Should have been an electrician, which is a great occupation because it's a broad skill set, and you can work in many different applications across industry sectors. My brother makes $120,000 a year as an electrician, and there are huge openings in the trades because of retirements, but also because of growth. So let's talk. Or I guess we already did, huh? Right.
So another question that's specific to for Rick is, does Tanimura and Antle have an R&D department in terms of technology that you use?
Everybody that works for us is R&D. When it comes down to it, I think you guys, you touched on it, a lot of what we learn is what the workers, feedback from the workers and things. But as far as having somebody with a title that says research and development, it's everybody in the company, really.
Yeah, and that's for those of us who are students of the history of technology. That's how the Industrial Revolution took place. It's right, trial and error and watching what everybody else was doing.
We have a big bone pile. That's where you build a machine and it doesn't work, so you put it in back. And then later, you're building a new machine and you think, oh, I got something out there. So,
Bone file.
Another question here is there any impact, either adverse or positive, of automation to the cultivation of organic products, or to the carbon footprint that's generated by the production process? How does automation factor into that one way or the other? Or does it?
The carbon footprint,
Yeah, in other words, I mean, are you going to have a lot of machines putting out a lot of, smog?
Well,
Or-
you have one machine that's doing the work that maybe a crew of 20 who each drove their car to work because they didn't want to ride the
Exactly.
bus because they would have had to get up an hour earlier. So I would probably tell you that it's going to reduce it significantly.
And does the more extensive use of automation hinder or affect in any way the ease of cultivating organic products as opposed to, products that rely on?
Over time, over time, it should not. I mean, if you have a good cultural practice in your organic farm, you'll be able to easily adapt it.
Okay.
I wondered if you wanted to mention your greenhouse production. I found some of that really interesting.
So we do have a sustainable, locally grown product that we produce. We actually produce it in Tennessee, though, and it's grown in a greenhouse. We have a 15 acres of greenhouse that's produces 30 to 40 times what its outdoor acreage would be. So it's like the equivalent of having 450 to 500 acres under production during the course of a year. And we use 95% less water, 95% less inputs. We have a little bit higher energy cost, but that's offset by not having to truck it from the East Coast, or from the West Coast to the East Coast. So that is a movement that's afoot. You hear a lot about vertical farms and going into a warehouse, and those are very, very very energy intensive. They're typically not growing a full head of lettuce. It's the little baby greens sort of thing. It's got a nice buzz. A lot of trust fund babies are putting their money into it because they make it feel good. They're a farmer today, but sunshine's free, right? So we build our greenhouses based on maximizing what we can get from the sun. So recently, last Sunday, it was 67 degrees and a very breezy day. And when the breezes hit over 12 miles an hour, the vents have to close. And when the vents close, the temperature spiked to 102 degrees. And so that's how intense the light can actually be in a greenhouse. So learning how to harness it. We've had the greenhouse now for 9 years, and we continue to amaze ourselves by how stupid we were and why were we doing it this way, and we continue to learn. So.
Excellent.
Yeah, the hard way.
So, Tim, going back to you, as I said, we were very gratified to hear that we're doing the right things as far as you're concerned at the state level. So given that you're blessing our activities here, is there any chance of support from the state?
Remember, you're on camera now, Tim.
Absolutely. No, we've made a connection, and we call this regional coalition development thing Slingshot, which is an odd name for, well, you know about it. We work together. It's called Slingshot, which is a weird term for building partnerships. You don't normally sort of shoot your partner with a slingshot. The idea is we want to find good coalition work already going that we can invest in to sort of accelerate, using our limited funds to do that. So for me, I am very excited about the opportunity to take credit for your good work.
Okay. So now looking a little more broadly at these issues, we have a question here that has brought up the issue of technological change and the fact that, with the explosion of computing power, we're going to have artificial intelligence. Within a couple of decades, maybe 30 years, it might, exceed human intelligence. And what implications does that have for the workplace and for the workforce?
I don't know. Next question. I guess the point I would make about that is, maybe things are different this time. right? There are aspects of computerization that are completely unprecedented. But that's what people said, when we had, 90% of our workforce in agriculture. And what are we going to do when we automate agriculture? And where are people going to have jobs? And they got jobs in the factories, right? And then what do we do when we're able to automate our assembly lines? Where are people going to work? And we discovered, YouTube and Facebook and Netflix and entertainment, all the things that are part of that. So I'm actually quite optimistic. I think there's no limit to human creativity and innovation. And if we're living in a society where basic needs are covered, then we're talking about a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we're looking at entertainment industries and service industries and tourism and all the things that are part of that. And I don't see a limit to the types of jobs that are potential in that kind of world. I can't predict what they're going to be 30 years from now. Mm-hmm. But I think the challenge is not technology. I think the challenge is our social and political institutions. Mm-hmm. When we have this amazing planter out there that's doing the work of 50 previous farmers, I'm very excited by that. I think that's a tremendous advancement in use of technology. And we need to figure out sort of what are the ways that people whose jobs are displaced get the new connections, get the new skills, are able to move into other economic opportunities. So it's not to minimize the very real human costs and disruptions that are part of technological change. But it's not a technological challenge, it's a social challenge that I think we as a society and people are up to the challenge, because I tend to be an optimistic guy.
So you're sort of alluding to the fact that, first of all, a nod to previous discussions of technological innovation that were, the answer has always been, but invariably there will be more jobs created than are eliminated by the new technology, so we don't have to worry about the end of work. But as you said, this time it might be different, right? Because of the incredible explosion in computing power and the fact that information and the processing of it underlies so much of the effort of production and distribution of goods.
That's right.
So, in effect, I think your answer is also hinting at an answer to this question, which I think is the really important one for us humans. Is there any way to measure progress besides economic growth? And could it be that we're entering an era where there will be we will start decoupling, jobs from progress, from human flourishing, and all of that kind of stuff? So that one's wide open there. Anybody want to take a shot at that one?
I just have to say, it's so interesting you asked that question, whoever asked that, because I'm actually involved literally at the moment we're speaking. I have research assistants that are working on a project with the Rockefeller Foundation that's trying to develop indicators for inclusive economies. And they're very explicitly not using the term inclusive growth, because they're trying to think about how do we measure economic change in a way that recognizes the importance of inclusion and develops indicators, real measurements around that. So I'm deeply steeped into lots and lots of indicators around that. They've developed a criteria that says that an inclusive economy should be equitable, it should be participatory, and that's participatory in governance institutions, but also in having control and influence over the decisions about how markets are organized, and participation as consumers and business owners as well as workers. It should be growing, but growing in ways that are transforming for greater human well-being, and so we're looking at actually measures of well-being that are part of that. It should be sustainable, and I have to say the indicator that we're struggling the most with, that they want us to come up with, is decision-making taking account of long-term consequences for those decision-making. Mm-hmm. So in principle, we can imagine it, but how do you measure that? We don't know. And then the fifth category is stable. How do you have an economy that provides stability in people's lives and avoids the kind of volatility and up and down of our typical economy? People might be interested in something called the Genuine Progress Indicator, which is an effort that's been around for at least 25, 30 years along this lines, and they start with the measure of gross domestic product, GDP, our traditional economic growth measures. They add on to that unpaid labor, the value of unpaid labor. So working in the home, childcare, all those things that are critical for our economic functioning that aren't captured by the market. And they also add on to that environmental services, the ways that trees clean the air, the ways that water provides services for agriculture and for other industries. And then they subtract from it the costs of environmental pollution and the health issues that are part of that. Now if we have a toxic spill that creates health problems and people have increased healthcare costs because they're exposed to the toxics, all of that counts as a plus in our economic accounting. Well, in fact, you should subtract all those environmental costs. And then they subtract the loss of leisure time, which is another one. So if you Google genuine progress indicator, there's efforts that are out there to really try and measure that. But I think what cuts across all of these is really an approach to thinking about human well-being and livelihoods rather than just this simple metric of GDP growth.
Excellent. Well, please join me in thanking our speakers for a very stimulating panel.
Thank you.
I think we're going to have a reception out in front. You can join us, and we have a.
Is it
We've
still
got some-
freezing out there?
We've got some presents for you here to help you remember CSUMB.
Wow.
Rick, here you go.
Oh, thank you.
Sweatshirt. Chris.
It's my hoodie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess we can.